Okay, here's an interesting experiment for you. Try typing in "reading a book a week" into YouTube's search bar. You'll probably see something like this. A lot. What has always puzzled me is who the hell came up with this standard? Now, seriously, is the quantity of books per unit time the right metric to optimize for? I believe that what you read and how you read it are much more important. In this video, I will show you my approach for optimizing those two things, particularly how to discover and evaluate what books are worth pursuing, and how to read them and take notes effectively in order to ensure that the time investment pays off. And in the second part of the video, I will also show you a way to apply this strategy to any article or even YouTube lectures. If you're interested, stay tuned. If I were to summarize the point of the video in one sentence, it's this. The key to effective reading is to start with the summary of the core ideas and then gradually add details layer by layer. Alright, let's unpack what this means a little bit. Previously, I used to think that the only use of book summaries was to save me from getting an F in middle school. You know how when you are assigned to read something, but since you had better things to do, you instead just Google the brief summary of the book while the teacher is handing out the quiz? Well, it turns out that summaries of books, especially non-fiction ones, can be an amazing tool for more effective reading. And that is for several reasons. Do you know how many books in total humanity has written? Well, me neither. But Google says it's about 150 million titles. And let's be honest, only a tiny proportion of them would be actually interesting and relevant to you. So it seems like picking a worthy one is like a shot in the dark. Additionally, books are a high investment, high reward type of information source. It takes about 2 weeks to read a single book from cover to cover, but in return, you get several years worth of author's experience and research. Now, that's pretty powerful. This is why we need to be extra picky about the next book to invest our time and effort into. And one great way to filter all this information overload is to actually read the book's summary before deciding whether it's worth committing to reading the whole thing. This helps to make sure that you don't waste valuable time and cognitive effort on something that would later turn out to be not what you expected. When you're reading fantasy novels or detectives, knowing the content in advance takes all the fun out of it. But with non-fiction books, it's actually the other way around. Checking out the summary before diving into the content itself can be super helpful in boosting your understanding. Summaries give you a quick rundown of the main ideas, arguments, and the overall structure of the book. Having this overview in mind kind of primes your brain to the incoming information and helps you stay focused while reading, making it easier to grasp complex ideas and follow the author's reasoning. Plus, it sets you with specific questions and objectives, which keep your brain engaged and thinking critically throughout the reading journey. For example, suppose in the very beginning, the author provides a very detailed personal anecdote. If you are unfamiliar with the rough outline of the book, it might seem out of blue and you may lose interest. However, if you've read the summary beforehand, you can relate this story to the crucial ideas coming up further in the book, which makes you much more engaged with the content. It is also a great idea to read the summary kind of side by side while reading the book, if you decide that it's worth investing into the full version. This helps you to keep track of where you are in the book's schema, and it's especially helpful when taking notes, but I'll get to that. Finally, the summary can be very useful even after you read the entire book. For example, suppose at some point you'd like to include or reference ideas from the book in your own work, be it a blog post, essay, or just a personal note. Skimming through the summary will help you recall the content and evoke similar chains of thought and insights you had during reading. Also, seeing the whole book laid out like this makes it much easier to link ideas together. Now that I hopefully convinced you that book summaries is something to consider, let me tell you what I believe is the best place to find them and how exactly it integrates into my workflow. In my opinion, the go-to place for book summaries is the platform called Shortform. Now, they are sponsoring this video, but don't let this fact put you off. Personally, I have been using Shortform for almost 2 years now, and I genuinely often recommend it to the people I meet. So rest assured that everything in this video is my unbiased opinion about the product that I love. In fact, they have no idea what I'm about to say in this video. Okay, so for starters, short-form summaries, or book guides in their terminology, are much more detailed and holistic than what I've seen on other platforms like Blinkist, for example. Every single book in their library contains a one-page summary, which is like a 10 to 15 minute read containing the book's key ideas. And judging by my personal experience, in most cases this is more than enough. These one-page summaries are super rich in information and are organized extremely well. No, seriously, I take my hat off to the team of writers who produce them, because it takes a lot of hard work to flesh out the entire book like this and lay out the ideas in such a streamlined fashion. And if you want to go deeper, some books, not all of them, usually the more popular ones, have the full guide feature, which is an even more detailed, chapter-by-chapter breakdown of the content. And the number one, my absolute favorite feature that makes short-form unique is what I like to call content augmentation. Essentially, throughout this summary, which outlines the book's key ideas and takeaways, you can see blocks of text tagged as short-form note. This is information which is not a part of the original book, but which was inserted by the author of the guide as relevant. And because the short-form writers clearly know what they are doing, these notes sprinkled throughout don't overshadow the summary itself. Instead, they make a nice addition and truly augment the book's content. For example, such notes often provide background information on what the author is talking about, different perspectives and even the drawbacks of the original point of view, backed up by relevant literature. So the name book guide is well deserved. You're not merely reading the dry summary. It's like you're having a conversation with the person who not only read the book thoroughly, but also knows background information, interesting facts, supporting works and other perspectives related to it. Now to the library. You can find books from almost every field, from science and health to business and finance. In terms of the sheer number of books, I'd say it's one of the short-form's weaker sides. Not every book is available on the platform, which is not surprising given the amount of effort it takes to create a book guide. So you might find that only one of every N books you're interested in has a short-form guide, where N really depends on how peculiar and non-mainstream your interests are. But on the bright side, new books are being added weekly, and I think as the platform grows and scales up, this rate can likely increase in the future. To show you short-form in action, let me take you on a tour and actually show you how I use it in combination with Obsidian to read books effectively. So whenever a new book falls onto my radar, the first thing I do is check whether there is a short-form summary. If there is, I begin to go through it and highlight important points. These highlights can be automatically linked to my Obsidian Vault via a Readwise API. As you can see, inside the reference notes folder, there is a subfolder called Readwise, which is the home for all the content generated and synced via Readwise. For example, not too long ago, I began to read the summary of Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte and make it highlights. As soon as I made the first highlight, it was synced, and Readwise created a corresponding note inside my Obsidian Vault. Notice that the author says short form rather than Tiago Forte, to point out that it's about the summary of the book and not the book itself. In this case, about halfway through the summary, I realized that the book is not quite what I expected. So I usually just add a little message to myself to know what exactly happened to reading the book, and keep the note inside the Readwise folder for potential future reference. In case I decide to read the full book, this process goes one step further. For instance, take the book When by Daniel Pink, which is about how circadian rhythms affect things like cognitive abilities, focus and mood, and how we can harness the biological clocks to be most productive and intentional with our time. I recently discovered it on Shortform, and after reading the summary, I decided to read the full book for more details, especially on chapters that resonate with me. I'm currently reading it with Apple Books, usually on my iPad or iPhone, and as I read I highlight and occasionally add brief notes right there in the Books app. These highlights are then automatically synced to Obsidian via Readwise. Now there are two notes corresponding to the same book. This is because one of them was brought to Readwise via Shortform and contains highlights and notes that I made on this summary, while the other one was synced from Apple Books and contains highlights and notes from the full book itself. But these highlights are usually not the end goal. If you watched some of my previous videos, you may know that I follow a Zettelkasten note-taking philosophy, where individual ideas are stored as atomic notes in one folder and linked together. This is why once I feel that my highlights reach the critical mass, so to speak, I start to refactor the notes, rewrite information in my own words, create new idea notes and link them to existing ones. It can happen after I finish reading the entire book or on a chapter-by-chapter basis. Here is an example of such a refactored book note. I recently finished reading Richard Feynman's autobiography, titled Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. Fascinating book, by the way. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. Even though it's an autobiography, laid down in the form of stories, there are some interesting lessons and ideas interspersed in the narrative, such as the importance of teaching, embracing the natural curiosity and drive for learning. I've scribbled down a few notes while reading it myself, but the amazing summary by Shortform really helped me gain an overview and isolate important points. And here is a more extreme example of turning the book into atomic ideas. This is what my note on Scott Young's ultra learning looks like. It initially started with highlights as well. Then I rewrote information in my own words, and because the book was so good, I actually turned the majority of what I wrote down into individual ideas as separate markdown files in my Zettelkasten network. So now the resulting reference note just contains links to the corresponding idea notes. Shortform guides are really amazing when it comes to books, but there are only so many of them, because it takes a lot of man-hours to put them together. So would it be possible to leverage the recent advancements in the development of large language models to create similar summaries of arbitrary content? Well, this is precisely what Shortform has done. Now, I'm usually quite skeptical about the swarm of different AI agent apps out there, but I think the new Shortform browser extension is the one of the few that actually makes sense and that has a lot of potential. Plus, it's very simple to use. You don't need to think about the prompt, no need to set up an OpenAI API key, just open any page you would like to get a summary of, be it an article or a YouTube video, press the Shortform extension icon and voila! I've been playing around with it for a few weeks now, and I can confidently say that it integrates nicely with how I consume information. Particularly game-changing for me was its ability to summarize any YouTube video. You see, when I research information for my own video scripts, or just learn for the sake of curiosity, apart from reading a ton of papers, I also watch recordings of lectures and conference talks, and YouTube has a surprisingly rich library of those. I found that such recordings can be amazing sources of information that are what I call AAA, accessible, aggregate, and accurate. They are accessible because the speaker usually explains the topic in a much simpler way compared to the source paper, accounting for the audience with diverse backgrounds. Aggregate, because unlike a paper, which dives very deeply into tackling an isolated problem, talks very often contain results of many consecutive papers tied together into a larger story. So you get an overview of the last 10 years of the speaker's research in just 1 hour. Finally, they are accurate, since the talks are usually given directly by the authors, so you have a unique chance to acquire some first-hand knowledge without a risk of misinformation. This makes lecture recordings an invaluable source of information, but there are a lot of them. So we face similar problems as with books, though be it on a smaller scale. So, just like with books, skimming through the summary of the lecture helps you identify whether it's something you actually want to watch. Because sometimes it's not clear from the title what the speaker is going to talk about. Now, previously I used to just scrub the YouTube playhead through the video to get a rough outline of the talk. Now, this scrubbing, which has a visual component, can be augmented with an AI-generated summary. Also, it's much easier to take and refine notes, which I do a lot while watching the talks. Remember what made the Shortform book guide special? This augmentation that gives you a bigger picture. Well, props to the developers, these AI-generated summaries not only give you a condensed version of the information, but they also contain this context, which is an overview of the subject matter and related background information, like the research directions of the speaker or the current problems in the field. There are also links to further readings, and often paragraphs about counter-arguments and limitations of what's talked about in the video itself. So nowadays, if by scrubbing through the YouTube video and skimming through the summary, I think that this particular lecture is worth the time investment, I begin watching it with my Obsidian open next to the browser, with a reference note corresponding to the talk. Whenever I hear new information that is worth writing down, I watch a bit further until the speaker finishes the point, then pause the video, rephrase the key information in my own words, and consult with the short-form summary to check how the AI decided to phrase this. Finally, I write it down in Obsidian, usually following a bullet list format, though sometimes I like to add the admonition boxes just to spice things up. Crucially, because I've been using the Zerocast note-taking system for more than 2 years now, a lot of the ideas mentioned in various talks turn out to be already present in my Obsidian vault as atomic notes. In this case, instead of rewriting the same information again, I simply insert a link to the corresponding idea note. Sometimes, if the lecture just adds some new details to the existing idea, I would go and modify the idea note itself, and try to write a small summarizing paragraph in the reference note on my own, like a take-home message. Finally, it's worth pointing out some of the limitations of this tool. First of all, because it is based on the video transcript, which in turn is generated via YouTube speech recognition, the AI summary can often confuse uncommon words, like specific terms or people's names. Take this example here, a wonderful lecture by Timothy Lillicrap on the biological plausibility of backpropagation, which by the way contains spoilers to my next video. The summary mentions that the speaker is Timothy A. Little, and sometimes, especially in the beginning of the summary, it may include not necessary information, like this sentence here that the author has been interested in this topic for a long time. Twice. But really, that's just nitpicking. If you just keep in mind that this is an AI tool after all, which means it may contain its own quirks, it's no big deal. Again, on a high level, it performs surprisingly well. Just for fun, I actually ran it on a few of my own videos, and it did a pretty good job. It actually found some super relevant readings. Well, I hope this video was helpful. If you want to try Shortform for yourself, there is my referral link down in the video description below, which will get you 5 days of unlimited access and a 20% discount on the annual membership. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button, share it with your friends and colleagues, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Stay tuned for more interesting topics coming up. Goodbye, and thank you for the interest in knowledge.